do it. It's go time.
Welcome to Go Time, your source for diverse discussions from all around the Go community. Thanks to our partners for helping us bring you awesome pods each and every week. Check them out at fastly.com, fly.io, and typesense.org. Okay, here we go.
Hello. Welcome to Go Time. I am your host, Chris Brando, and this week we are talking about the solo gopher, developing software on your own, or I guess with a small community of other people, but mostly on your own. Joining me today, I have my wonderful co-host, Ian Lopshire. How are you doing today, Ian?
Great. Good to be here.
Fantastic. And joining us as well is Ben Johnson. How are you doing today, Ben?
Hey, doing well. Thanks for having me on.
Great. So I think since, Ben, you were on a few weeks ago, we don't need to do any kind of big introduction. So let's jump in straight to the content. So to begin with, let's try and define what we mean by a solo project here, right? Because this episode's all about building stuff on your own, not with a big team, people, not hundreds or tens of people, but just kind of your own. But we don't really ever do anything completely on our own, right? So I don't know. Ben, let's start with you. How would you define a solo project?
Yeah, sure. For me, I think a solo project is really where you're probably contributing 95% of the code, the docs, the support, all that stuff, and I feel like that's probably most projects out there, honestly. There tend to be kind of a lot of little islands, and people will come visit you on the island and help out a little bit and then leave, but you're kind of the one steadying the ship, in the long term. So I guess that's kind of what I consider to be a solo project.
Ian, how do you see solo projects?
Yes, I would mirror that, where you're doing most of the committing, where you're not having to worry about other people's contributions. You can force push on your branch and not worry about it, that sort of project. I do think we should make a distinction between a solo project and a side project. One is for, let's say, your job or for work or to be consumed by an organization. And I do think that's a different type of work than a side project you're doing on your own with no company backing or...
Yeah, I could see that.
I would call that a side project versus a solo project. I don't know.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I could see that distinction.
So something like, for you, Ben, BoltDB, that would be a solo project.
It started as a side project originally. I was originally just trying to learn about a database, so I tried porting it to Go, and then we ended up actually just needing it at work. So we swapped it out with the underlying database we had and found a bunch of bugs that I had written, and then it's kind of is what it is today. But yeah, it definitely started off just coding on the side, never expecting to see the light of day whatsoever. So they could definitely change over time.
Yeah, I suppose when you start expecting other people to actually use it,
yeah,
it becomes a real solo project versus a side project.
Yeah, for sure. It really does motivate you, though, when you know that there are actual people or corporations depending on your code. It's motivating and terrifying at the same time.
Yeah, I can imagine because, Bolt now is, even though you don't maintain it anymore, but Bolt is a major part of Kubernetes, which is used by so many people all over the place.
Yeah, it was actually, I don't know, maybe late last year, I think. So Bolt is inside of Console from HashiCorp, and they had an older version, and it actually took down Roblox, the game, for 3 days. And the root cause analysis was BoltDB, a design decision I had made a decade ago. So that's I wouldn't call it a claim to fame or a claim to infamy, I guess. But it's weird the consequences, your solo side project, whatever, a long time ago can eventually have. So
yeah, it reminds me of that XKCD comic where it's just kind of the one dude in Nebraska, with that one piece that's holding up the entire modern internet. I never remember which project that is about. I always want to say curl, but I think the guy in curl is in Europe, right? The curl guy.
I don't know. It was actually an actual person who was referring to.
Oh.
I thought it was just a general, this is half the projects on the internet. Yeah, OpenSSL or, all those.
Yeah. It's a treacherous area for sure. So yeah, I guess, do either of you draw a distinction between the size of the project? Does the size become important when thinking about solo projects? I guess Do you have an opinion on whether solo projects should have a cap in size, I guess you'd say?
I think for your sanity, probably. I mean, I think that, like for Bolt, I was pretty intentional about keeping a scope. And like, I even got some blowback. At one point, I just said the project was basically done. Like, I'm not adding more features because it was complete. And I think that's a good thing to do. It's really easy to like just take on one more feature or whatever, and then that has other effects on other features. And then, it just kind of grows and grows, and you kind of get this, I don't know, a project you don't really recognize anymore. And you probably don't want to maintain after a while, honestly, especially if you're not, it's not for a job or anything. So there's some cap. I don't know what it is, though.
How long was BoltDB a kind of side/solo project for you before it kind of caught on in the community and other people started contributing?
It was kind of a side project, I would say, for maybe a year or two. I was working at Shopify at the time, and we ended up using it internally. So it kind of got a lot of testing and validation from that. And I think that kind of helped push out the community, and people got more comfortable with it. I think there was also there weren't really any other key value stores at the time. This is like 2012, 2013. So when you have just like a dearth of options out there, then people will use anything. Like, it's shocking, honestly, the number of people that used Bolt in the early days. And thank goodness they did. It's better for them. But they're definitely living on the edge. There's some people that are just fine with, using some cutting edge database, and that's great. I mean, it takes those people.
Yeah, sorry to derail your question, Chris.
No, I mean, you're a co-host. You can derail as much as you like.
But I mean, I don't think there's like actually a size limit, but for the sanity, yes. What is the project that powers all the backwards compatibility stuff for JavaScript? It's like...
You're thinking Babel? Or
it's what powers like the Babel compatibility layer. It's like core something and a single guy maintained that. And
is it JavaScript core? I don't know. I'm just going to make it up names now.
It might be JS core. But that was a single project by a single guy that was huge. And it definitely, you can look through the history of that, and it's definitely a hard thing to do. So, like, for your sanity, that does make sense. Keep it small. Yeah,
I guess small can also be like the scope and size of the thing that you're maintaining, or just like the scope and size of the people who are using it. So I feel like there's a lot of like small solo projects around like building a operating system or something like that. But like the number of people using it is small enough that it's just kind of like, okay, well, this isn't going to create a lot of pressure on you or, burn you out or anything like that. Whereas if you're trying to build and maintain like a production level or general purpose operating system, that might wind up being a bit more challenging. So yeah, I guess like, Ben, you're someone that's maintained a rather large solo project. Do you have any like tips or advice especially for people writing Go that maintain solo projects or want to maintain solo projects or want to start a solo project? Yeah, sure. I don't know if I have anything Go specific. I mean, I think that make your code as simple as possible. Like, if you can avoid concurrency, like, or just find ways you can make it testable. Over time, like, you're not going to remember how to test a feature 6 months from now. So automated tests are obviously a huge deal. But I think more generally, just saying no to people is a great skill to have because people will want you to do stuff and you're probably going to take on too much. So the more you can say no and honestly just push back on people and honestly just kind of ask more of people. Like if someone says, hey, you should add this to your project, then, I think having them do the legwork of even just like understanding the problem or like writing things up or like, getting tests and whatnot around things. I think there's like a certain level of trust you need to have with contributors as well. Like some people just kind of do drive-by PRs and, they drop some functionality and then you never see them again, but you're kind of stuck maintaining it in the long term. So I think it's okay just to not accept people's PRs, honestly. And you don't have to be a jerk about it, but just being able to push back is a good thing. Again, for your sanity. Yeah, that's definitely something that from I think a general open source standpoint, it's always is tough, is being like, it's not that your idea is bad, it's just that there's not the infrastructure around it to support it long term. I've also found a lot in the past, not once again, more generally with open source stuff, where people will want you to implement something in a very specific way that solves just their problem. And it's like, yeah, there's a general class of problem here that we could probably solve and put in the work and effort around that.
Yeah, and there's just so much context, other people don't have around the project, and you kind of see all the use cases over time of how people use it, and everyone else just doesn't have that, so it's hard to kind of communicate that as well.
And how do you communicate that? Do you write documentation? Do you write articles? just existing around the project?
Yeah, actually, docs is a huge thing. Honestly, if you're going to start your own project, like if you want it to become popular, really like write docs, like devote time to docs because no one else does. Like it's shocking the level. Like when I wrote Bolt, like honestly, it was always kind of like put out as a use, like an example of like really great docs. And I don't think it was like amazing docs, but it was really just like so many other projects. Just you'd go to like basically Go Docs and it would just have the API, but no context around how to use things or why things are implemented or the design of it, any of those pieces. So I think people are really super appreciative of that. And I think it just kind of, again, I think like software in general is kind of like there's a lot of trust. Like you can't read everyone's code all the time. You just have to trust that this thing works. And, we go off of other people's, use of it in the past. And, so, someone else recommends a tool. And depending on how much you trust them, we might trust that tool as well. So I think anything you can do to kind of build that trust, like docs or writing blog posts, things like that, coming on podcasts, I think that goes a long way to actually just helping people feel more comfortable. In the end of the day, ultimately it might just break down anyway. Like maybe it'll break, but hopefully you can kind of develop trust over time. And, I tend to pick projects from other people that I have used in the past. Like I know a lot of people like Armin at the time when I was writing, Armin from HashiCorp. He used to, he wrote a lot of like distributed system stuff at the time, and they were great tools. So, whenever stuff came out from him, I was always quick to adopt it. Whereas other people I didn't know as well, I think I'm a little more hesitant. So I think just building trust in the community really goes a long way. That was a roundabout answer to your question.
Good answer. How do y'all think it changes for an open source project versus something closed source that you're doing for a company? Is it different?
Yeah, I would say so. Sorry, Chris, I don't mean to, if you're going to jump in there.
No, go ahead.
I think that for personal stuff, I think there's a lot of reasons, like a lot of kinds of motivation you can have for personal projects. Like some people just want to expand their network and reach. And like when I started doing Bolt, I think that was a motivator for me. Like, I didn't know a lot of people in the open source world. I didn't really have much of a name, and just like getting that out there has helped me professionally. But then kind of where I'm at now, like when I build projects, I just want to build weird stuff that kind of like fills some interesting niche or like is a hard problem to solve. And like I wanted to solve real world problems, but I don't have like the networking side of it that I need to be as concerned about. So I think there's different motivations on the, the personal project side. From like a corporate project side, like the main motivation is probably money. So things that drive adoption of it and then probably adoption of the company's products and things like that. I think it just has different vibes. It's not, good or bad, just different.
Yeah, I think the way I kind of think about it is that solo projects are good if you're not in a corporate environment. I think they're kind of terrible ideas inside of like corporate environments for anything that's even remotely important, which is probably most things. Like if it's not important, then like why are you doing it? Like I think this is probably where I'd make a distinction between like a learning project and a solo project, right? Like if you're building something to just learn and tinker and like expand your skills, I think that's one thing, and I think those types of projects can absolutely exist within a corporation. I think we should have more of those. Like people should spend more time tinkering and learning so they don't tinker on the main thing you're building. But I think as far as like projects, you're like, oh, I'd like to like kind of maintain this for a while or use it in some useful capacity. Yeah, I think from a business perspective, that's a pretty huge risk, because like if that one person leaves, then what are you going to do? Is someone else going to pick up that project? Does someone else have the bandwidth? Did they, once again, write enough docs and enough other information around it to actually shore up so someone actually could come on and just, continue the project forward? So it's a lot of open questions. And from having worked in a fair number of companies, people inside companies are even worse about not writing docs than I think people out in the open world. I think there is this kind of minimum amount of docs that you need to have a successful project in the open source world, so people can at least like run the thing. But the number of code bases I think many of us have run into internally that are just like, oh, there's a README that just has the name of the repo and nothing else. And it's like, how do I make this thing work? It's like, oh, there's a wiki over there or something.
Yeah, I think like personal projects, I think are like in open source projects are great as almost like a training. Like you really kind of think about your code differently and how you present it when you know other people will read it. So I think being able to take those skills and then bring them into like a corporate environment where you do actually document things you're doing or like, include a README on a repo, I think really goes a long way.
Yeah. So I work at a pretty small company where you're often working on things, not alone, but at least a section of something alone for a good amount of time. And something we've implemented is like a decision log. So every big decision, you write down why you did it. And it's, 001, why we're building this project. 002, let's think about the architecture, right? And in other projects, like be able to read why they made a decision is huge.
Yeah, it's nice to have that history.
Yeah, I think I think you kind of mentioned it before, Ben, as well. But I think that's like an important thing is like documenting not just how the thing it works, but your thinking around it. Because especially for a solo project, you're not going to remember that 6 months from now or a year from now while you made that one decision. It definitely feels like in the moment, you're like, oh, there's no way I would forget why I made this decision. And then like a week later, you come back and look at it and you're like,
who wrote this? Yeah,
I sort of remember some of my thoughts around this. It's just like, just write it down. Just write down what you're thinking. And that'll probably be a bit better.
Yeah, I tend to write a lot of comments in my code. And I do it because I know there's like some debate about whether you should comment your code a lot or not. But I do it because like I tend to write out how I'm thinking about the problem in my comments, and then my code doesn't always, if it doesn't match what I'm actually commenting, then it's easy to kind of see that disconnect versus coming back and seeing like a bunch of variable names and pluses and whatever, all those things. So it's almost like a little like mini, like a bad unit test, I guess, within my code, just to like check my thinking versus what I actually coded. I can read it back.
Yeah, it seems like I've been trying to think about like how I would name like that type of thing, or like really, I've been doing too much thinking about like what is code and how should we think about it. But I think one of the things that I come up with from that is like this idea of redundancy. And I think when you're doing that in your code, you're adding like layers of useful redundancy. I think probably a lot of the time people's issue with those types of comments they are useless redundancy, where it's just like, oh, like X equals 5, and then you write above it setting X to 5. It's like that is not helpful. Like that, you gave me a redundancy, but that is noise. Whereas I think the thought process of this is why I'm writing this code in this way, I think that's very useful redundancy. So I guess if we were to like sum that up as a tip, I would say like, add useful redundancy to your solo projects, because it's going to make it easier to come back to them if you, leave them alone for a little bit, or for someone else to come through and, add something or send you a PR or whatnot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And honestly, even if you worry about, things getting out of sync, like you may have written something and it's changed somewhere else later on, like people do come along and like comment or like open issues like, hey, your docs say this thing and does it actually work that way or whatnot? And so people actually will pick it up later on and help you out. People are pretty good about actually fixing like English bugs, I guess, or like things that are written versus like actually writing unit tests and things like that. That's a little harder.
Yeah. From a like, because I think, Ben, you've had like a couple of, you had Bolt. I guess like Lightstream sort of started off as like just you, or maybe it was just you and someone else, I think, or was it
no,
just you? Yeah. And there was kind of like a big difference between like Bolt and Lightstream, where I think probably still you had this policy of like not accepting contributions.
Oh, yeah.
So I figure that's like a struggle that you faced in kind of Bolt originally of taking contributions. Maybe you can talk a little bit more about that, and also other struggles that you have faced around kind of maintaining these kind of more, I guess, like production level solo projects.
Yeah, honestly, it's boundaries, I think, is the biggest thing. Like, I think it's really easy. Like, if you get a project that gets popular, like, you'll have people opening issues and just like, I don't know, you just kind of become the one person that kind of shoulders a lot of that stuff. So I think that I think, again, like it kind of depends on motivation of your project. Like if you're doing it to kind of expand your reach, then accepting PRs and things like that can really help. But like, Lightstream is more recent. And I think for me, like I kind of knew the tool I wanted to build. And like I wanted to keep it simple. So Lightstream, if you're not familiar, is basically you can take a SQLite database and you can run Lightstream with it, and it'll automatically continuously stream changes up to S3. So you can run a single node of SQLite and basically have durable data, even if that node crashes. And that's kind of what I wanted to do. Is like, what's the one problem with SQLite and using it for like an actual server context is that you don't want to have just one server and then it dies and then you lost all your data. So I want to fix that problem and kind of that problem alone. So when it came to restricting contributions, I think it was really just, I guess it was honestly having the vision and just knowing exactly how I wanted to do it. And sometimes you need help in other ways. I think like people contributing issues and docs and, there's a myriad of things that make a project successful. And I feel like code is kind of like a very small piece of it. And it's also the kind of the complicating piece. Like you need people to have a lot of context, especially like with low level file system interactions and things like that, that a lot of people kind of lack, or at least at that low level context. So yeah, I think that's another roundabout answer, but I think that's kind of why I kind of restricted code contributions is I don't think they're that useful for all the work it takes to accept them versus something like a docs contribution or someone writing a blog post about Lightstream or, adding testing, things like that.
Oh, I mean, that I guess I could say like fair. That makes sense. Like, yeah. I think sometimes we as an industry get to this point where it's just like code is the most important thing. And it's like, I don't know if it really is like the most important thing. It's important, but it's also the place that's easiest to mess things up. And there's like other ways that you can like help and contribute and all of that. And maybe focus on that some more. I think also like that's a good way to, if you did want to potentially have contributors in the future, having people that have consistently contributed to docs and helped explain things in a blog post is probably a good way to figure out if someone's kind of will be around for a while or if they're just going to kind of drive by and then disappear. If you were to think about opening up a project to more people. But, speaking of which, solo projects don't have to remain solo forever. So have you thought about, the process you might take if you wanted to bring more people in to help like maintain Lightstream, or you start another project solo and you wanted to eventually become something where there's more contributors?
I mean, I've thought about it. I feel like my favorite projects out there tend to have like the benevolent dictator for life model where like there's one person basically kind of doing a lot of the work on the project and it has kind of narrow scope. So it's, I feel like if you think of like projects you just like, or like even products you just don't like Jira, like does everything and everyone hates it. So like, I think there's a certain, I don't want to use the word like artistry. I hate that. But it's like, you have like a certain vision of what you want. And if you can keep it narrow and tight, like people really like using those kind of tools. And those are the kind of tools that I like to build. So for me personally, I don't necessarily want to run a project that's larger than me or maybe me and one other person. You can, if you really focus and have a vision on something, I think you can really do a lot with it before you really need to bring on other people. And at that point, honestly, you're probably starting to talk about like, actually maybe building a business around it, or like if it's actually that scale of tool, that's a different conversation.
Right. And I suppose too, it matters a lot who you are as a person. Like I think you, Ben, are someone that like likes writing code and likes doing those types of things. Whereas you're more someone that's like likes organizing people and leading people and doing more of the project or product management work. Perhaps like starting something solo, but then getting other people on board could be kind of not as heavy of a bandwidth thing as it might be for someone that like really just wants to be writing code.
Yeah, I am definitely a hermit, so I'll admit that. I'm probably the worst person to ask about bringing other people on.
This is a changelog news break. Can you trust ChatGPT's package recommendations? Not so much. The team at Vulkan have published a new security threat vector they're calling AI package hallucination.
That sounds good. I'll have that.
It relies on the fact that ChatGPT sometimes answers questions with hallucinated sources, links, blogs, and statistics. It'll even generate questionable fixes to CVEs and offer links to libraries that don't actually exist.
What about the ROUSs?
Rodents of unusual size? I don't think they exist.
Quote, when the attacker finds a recommendation for an unpublished package, they can publish their own malicious package in its place. The next time a user asks a similar question, they may receive a recommendation from ChatGPT to use the now existing malicious package. End quote. These AI tools like ChatGPT are a real boost to developer productivity, but be careful out there. You just heard one of our 5 top stories from Monday's Changelog News. Subscribe to the podcast to get all of the week's top stories and pop your email address in at changelog.com/news to also receive our free companion email with even more developer news worth your attention. Once again, that's changelog.com/news.
Ian, you mentioned like at work you're doing some like solo projects and whatnot, or you kind of work more in isolation. I guess like in kind of the similar vein to what I asked Ben, like what's it like when you need to like bring more people in? Are there like certain things that you do? Are there ways that you work when you're operating solo that then you like shift so that you can bring someone else in, or are you just kind of always operating in the kind of mindset where someone could jump in at any time?
Yeah, you kind of hit the nail on the head there. Like working in a company solo, I think you always have to assume someone's about to jump in, especially if you care about the success of the company in the future, even if you're not around. Like something I used to do is like have branches that don't get merged for a while and that kind of stuff. And as soon as someone jumps in, like that sort of stuff, it doesn't fly. So all those bad habits that you can develop, like do your best not to develop them at all. You know, stop force pushing on branches a lot that other people are using, that sort of thing. I think a lot of it is like around the tooling too, right? Like just maybe not the code itself, but like being a good user of Git, a good user of whatever your best practices are for deployments, that sort of thing. There's so much more to working with more than one person than just the code. That's what I'm trying to say there. It's not about the code, it's about the process and about the tooling and about the documentation, all of that.
Yeah, that's fair. And that in a corporate context, that seems like, yeah, no, you should be thinking that someone could jump in anything. Mostly because it's like, I don't know, what if you want to go on vacation and now all of a sudden this thing needs to get done, and
exactly,
you don't want to have to be stressing before your vacation of like, I got to do all this knowledge transfer and whatnot. It's like, I just have it ready to go from the beginning.
Yeah, I like to live by the always have things too deep motto. Like there should be at least two people that at least are somewhat familiar with this thing. I don't want to be on call for something 100% of the time just because I built it, right?
Right. Yeah, and I guess from like more like back to you, Ben, with this kind of open source kind of style, Bolt was used by a lot of organizations, and I feel like Lightstream will hopefully be used by a lot of organizations. How did you like handle like support like things with Bolt? And how are you planning on handling support like things with Lightstream? Like, are you like, oh, well, like, charge people they want a support thing, or I have this type of like, just handle it in the issue queue in GitHub? How do you like handle that sort of stuff?
Yeah, I mean, I think for Bolt, I was definitely pretty hands-on when trying to figure out, everyone's issues all the time whenever something happened and being more proactive about it. But I think that for Lightstream, I mean, eventually I closed down Bolt, like I archived the project and it got forked as bbolt from etcd or from CoreOS. So it kind of lives on in a corporate world, I guess. As far as like Lightstream, I think I push back a lot more. Like people have issues, I'll help them figure out what the underlying issue is. Like I'll kind of ask them questions or try things or what they can look for. But I think I don't try to take ownership of that issue necessarily, unless someone like if someone can give me like a reproducible way to get to hit an issue, then it's usually super simple to figure out what the problem is. But like trying to like guess and like futz around for hours trying to reproduce the thing it's a pain. Someone else's environment, and so I think really pushing back and having people kind of own more of that process, I think helps a lot. So no, there's no money coming in from the OSS projects.
Okay. So it's just like a support out of the goodness of your heart sort of thing to keep the project going.
And honestly, like open source, I think makes zero sense. Like I do a lot of open source just because I like solving problems, and it's like a different feel from like writing corporate code where you're really free to just kind of like make whatever solution you want, and you can try different things and you can spend as much time on it as you want, which is kind of free, and you kind of learn a lot along the way. That's kind of why I do it. But yeah, there's no money.
I feel like that's like the interesting paradox of like open source in general, but also like of our industry as a whole, where like so many things are just like, it starts off as one person's project because they wanted to learn how to do something or figure out how to do something, and all of a sudden it's like, I mean, that's how Linux started, right? Like Linus just wanted to write an operating system kernel, and he's like, I don't care if this is like the best design or whatever according to researchers and the academics, I'm just going to write what I want to write. And now it's, I think, probably the most popular operating system on the planet, or at least the most deployed operating system on the planet.
I think you're right, yeah.
And I think that's weird because it's like, I don't think that anybody is really starting these projects thinking like, I'm going to try and get rich off of this, or I'm going to try and make like a ton of money off of this thing.
Yeah, I hope not. They're in for a surprise.
Yeah, it's like your chances of building something that, even the things that do get monetized, there's very few that start off open source and then wind up as something monetizable. Any of it doesn't wind up long-term monetizable is like the question. Because like usually some company will come along and be like, we're just going to do this and steal all your business away, which is like a whole other type of weird problem.
Yeah. Actually, like VCs start reaching out to you as well. That's another interesting one. You just start writing open source projects and all of a sudden these people just like want to have meetings with you. It's weird. It's like I just sit in my basement and write code, man. Like I don't know why you're calling me.
That's also
Why you think that I can run a business? I have no idea. I can't.
I feel like there's probably some market for trained business leaders that can like effectively like help solo like developers like build products and like run the rest of the business for them and just be like, okay, you just keep working on this and then we'll do all the other things to make it monetizable. I mean, slightly off topic, but yeah, the whole like VC thing of like us taking people who are just like, I just want to write code, man. And then being like, hey, run an entire company and here's like $150 million. Go have fun. It's kind of like,
Yeah. Actually, the irony of it too is like if you end up taking an open source project and then trying to build a business out of it, and you become CEO and it becomes successful, you basically stop writing code. Like CTO is not a coding job; it is a managing people job. And I've been in companies like that in the past where we had like open source databases, and like the CTO had like barely written code in the last like 5 years. So it's a weird curse.
yeah. I guess that's helpful info for people that are interested in doing solo dev. That was just like, think about it. Like even if people like sell you on this whole story of, yeah, you're going to make so much money. You're going to have all of this networking you could do, all this clout and all of this. But it's like, you're going to have to give up the thing that you love doing so much that you're doing it in your free time for no money. Like, it seems, it's a weird thing that our industry is structured the way it is. And perhaps that's something that we should think more about as a whole of just like, maybe the founders shouldn't be the C-suite. Maybe the founders should just be engineers that are very respected and have a lot of control over the technical aspects of the thing, but not the business as a whole. I wonder too, if that kind of perspective would help more people that kind of, as I mentioned before, people that want to do a solo project or want to do something but don't have the skills to build it, to write the code themselves, to go out and actually start projects and kind of lead projects and communities of people toward building things. I think that would be also, helpful. I feel like that's probably a gap that exists. I feel like.
Yeah, I can see that.
I feel like a lot of projects are just like, it's either one person or it's a company. And like the place in the middle is also this weird, strange place.
Yeah, for sure.
I feel like we've talked a lot about what I would perceive it as advantages of solo dev. It's kind of freeing, all of that. What are the pitfalls? Like, in my mind, you could get stuck not getting feedback, not learning from what you're doing. Like, how do you know what you're doing is correct? How do you learn from stuff when you're doing it solo?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think that, man, there's a long list of things that are bad about solo dev. I'll try to be brief, not to talk, disparagingly about it. Everyone has their thing. But I think that, motivation, I would say, is a huge one. Like, especially in the early days when you have like 4 stars on your project and it's just like, has anyone ever seen this code or actually run it? You have no idea. And like, honestly, even projects like Bolt, like I have no idea how many people use Bolt. I just know it's more like the number of people that have actually reached out to me and have been like, hey, I use Bolt on this like terabyte size database that we run our company on or something like that. It's like a dozen people maybe over the last 10 years. It's not very often. So really you kind of just like extrapolate it from either like GitHub stars, which is not a great way, or the other way is like I used to do consulting and like basically every Go shop I went to had a thing that used Bolt. So I was like, oh, I guess it's used places, but you don't really have a sense of it otherwise. So I think like motivation is a big thing and actually knowing when it's used. So actually if you are using code, I think just like reaching out to people and letting them know like, hey, I use your code. It's great. Thanks for writing this, because they probably don't ever hear that. It's shocking how often we kind of forget about that. So motivation was one. Sorry, there's another one I had. I forgot now though.
Yeah, I think that's a good, for those people who are consuming to remember to like go back and actually, even if it's just like a thank you for building this thing, it was like, hey, I use this and like this was useful for me in that way. Like that stuff can be really motivating to people that are kind of maintaining these things out by themselves.
Like going back to the learning bit, I think when you are doing like solo projects like this, that network that you build from it becomes so much more important than other places, right? Like,
yeah, for sure. Yeah, like with Bolt again, honestly, like the earlier version had a lot of things wrong with it. There was one guy out there, he goes by TV, it's like TV42 on GitHub. And he would just like, he went through my code and basically like pointed out a bunch of places where I had forgotten to do like a read all instead of or like a read full instead of a read on a reader, and like a bunch of little bugs. And like, I learned a ton of stuff just from his feedback early on. So, the community can be great, honestly, like people that engage. And honestly, when you put stuff out, people will immediately tell you what's wrong. And I think it's important not to like attach your sense of self-worth to your project too much. And just, this is the best you know how to do right now. That's great. And just you can learn, and the next time you'll do better and just keep improving. But I think it is really easy. Like when people are like, oh, I got this bug, or I lost my data or something like that from code that you wrote, it's kind of demoralizing.
Yeah, I feel like that's a really, really good point of just like, if you're going to be a solo dev, you should probably find a way to like disconnect yourself from the thing you produce. You are not the thing you produced. The thing kind of needs to stand on its own. And I think that's like, that's something I learned in school with my writing classes, was just like, you are not your writing. And the way you get better as a writer is by getting constructive criticism, which usually just feels like people tearing your work apart. But that helps you grow. It's like, oh, okay, well, like I did this wrong, or I didn't tell this thing in the right way or whatever. I think that is very, as you said, very helpful when it comes to, building projects and all of that. And I think too, not enough people give like constructive feedback on projects, which could also be a thing. I think that maybe dropping an issue in the issue queue, just being like, hey, like this thing looks a little weird. Not sure if you noticed or whatever, and not being afraid to do that. Because I think that's like another, like on the other side of it, if you're like someone that's consuming into like solo people's work, especially if it's someone like you, Ben, who like knows a lot, or like Armin, or these people are like really well known. It's like, do these people make mistakes? I don't think these people make mistakes. There's just something wrong with my knowledge. I'm not going to say anything. And it's like, no, they're still regular humans. Like they make many mistakes, just like the rest of us.
Many, yep. I think that even like just prefacing an issue, just being like, hey, thanks for the project, like just some kind of thing where it's not just like complaining to somebody, I think does go a long way, honestly, just in setting kind of some context. And I think another interesting thing too with like with open source is that since it is such a global community, like people from all over the world use it. There's an interesting mix where like first of all, people where English is not their first language, like the way that they write an issue may be very direct, or like they may just come from a culture where, for someone like I grew up in the Midwest, like we like trip over ourselves to like not say a mean thing ever to anyone, and like whatever. And like people from other parts of the world, may just be like, hey, this is broken, this sucks, or like whatever. Like they're not trying to be mean. That's just their approach, or maybe it's how they translate or how they talk in issues. And I think that just being able to like be okay with that or like move through it helps a lot with your sanity. And also another issue we have in our not issue, but like I'm autistic myself, and I know a lot of software developers tend to be autistic, and we tend to be very direct in the things that we say. So I think there's a lot of like that social nuance that can be missed with issues. People just pop open an issue real quick, type something out, and send it. So I think from both sides, trying to be a little more accommodating, and also on the receiving end, just knowing that the person's probably not trying to tell you that you're a terrible person, that everything, it's okay. They had an issue, and that was it.
I would assume from like, maybe you can confirm this, but I assume like having templates for things where it's just like, hey, like this is the information I'd like you to tell me, and maybe having like some sort of document that people can read of like, please, like this is how like good ways to express tone or whatever. Do those types of things help, or is it just kind of still like? My
impression is that like the people that are going to take the steps to read those things or actually fill them out appropriately are probably have the they probably care enough to actually do that stuff. Whereas the people that are just the people that are going to be jerks are going to just like blow through that or delete your template and just write their own thing. So I'm not sure it helps the right people, if I'm being honest.
Okay, that's fair. So I feel like that maybe is like not necessarily a downside, but definitely a thing to be aware of is like, you gotta be a bit tougher, I think, if you're gonna solicit input from other people to be a solo dev, of just being like, yeah, no, like sometimes people will just be straight up rude or like somewhat hostile, and you're kind of like, okay, that's nah. But yeah, sometimes it's just like communication, or they're just like, I have some friends that are Eastern European, and even they'll say it, they're just like very direct with things, and they're like, we don't understand why Americans, like, why are you going all adding all these extra words to express something? Just say it. So it's like, yeah, it's just cultural differences. But yeah, and being able to, I think, discern between those two things, which I think is a good life skill in general.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, but going back to the whole like assume positive intent thing, which is very difficult to do on the internet. It is, yeah. So is there anything about Go specifically that you think makes it good or bad for solo projects and kind of solo development?
I think that the fact that you can, I know everything's kind of bundled in really well. I feel like, you produce a single static binary. I think that can be great for like reproducibility. I think the build chain's pretty simple generally. You get into stuff like Ruby or, you have to worry about all your shared libraries, what happens to be running locally. I think those can be painful for sure. So I think that's a really nice part about Go. I don't usually have an issue with the environments and setting those up correctly. And also like just from version to version, like things don't, there's like the Go 1 compatibility promise. Like you don't have to worry so much about the Go versions. That's not usually a big question that I have when I'm debugging issues. So I think that's great, honestly. We don't have like a bunch of browsers we have to worry about. That's another nice thing. Like this is not JavaScript.
True.
Yeah. I started writing back in like IE5 and like Netscape Navigator days, and that was horrific.
The front end is it's a challenging space for sure. I also feel like we in the Go land don't have like we have a standard library, and that gives you most of what you need. And I feel like we have a really strong community of just like, you don't need extra frameworks or libraries and all of that to do like the really basic stuff. Like sometimes you might want some for like, I think there's a few that are staples, like, probably don't use the built-in flag package because it kind of sucks. And it's
I use the built-in flag package.
I also use the built-in flag package.
It's just like I wish they had not done that thing where it's just like it's not like Unix flags. It's just
I think it's because it supports Windows as well. So
Yeah.
they're kind of trying to take the common ground between the two. That's my understanding.
so I guess even there, it's like, okay, I guess most people probably do use the built-in flags package. But I think that could be like the one place where it'd be like, yeah, no, if you want to bring in, I don't remember what the name of the external flags package is, but if you want to bring that in, I can see that. But it's like, I don't know, if you're going to spin up a web service, you can bring in a framework, but you don't have to bring in a framework. Or if you want to do, parsing of args or whatever, you don't have to bring in. You want to do configuration, you don't have to bring in an external library. Like the internal JSON one is probably just fine. So I think that probably helps a lot as well, because then once again, you're not pulling in extra dependencies and all of that.
Yeah, everybody kind of knows the standard library pretty well. Or not everybody, but I mean a lot of Gophers. We all just kind of know how to use JSON or whatnot. It's lower barrier to entry.
Ian, do you have any things you think makes Go good for solo dev?
I mean, it's kind of the built-in documentation stuff. Just knowing where I should be putting like comments is nice. Does that make sense? And being able to automatically like generate that out to post somewhere like internal, because you can't use GoDoc for the private repos. It's nice. So like on the corporate side, I do think that's a big deal. And then mirroring everything you just said, like just getting people up to speed is a lot easier than say Python or JavaScript. The same thing people always say.
The things that make Go good also make Go good for solo dev. Okay, that's I feel like that's fair, right? It's all right. Well, before we jump into unpopular opinions, do either of you have anything else you want to say about solo dev? Or I guess, do you have any advice you might give to somebody? I mean, this whole podcast has been about advice, but is there like one thing you would say to somebody who's just like listening to this and is like, I would like to start a project tomorrow? What would you say to them?
I think my advice would be just like small iterations. And I think that goes for any project, but like motivation is probably going to be your biggest problem when you're a solo dev. And just being able to like make a release that has like 2 features in it. That's great. Like just make it, ship it, and do that on a regular cadence. And like you're going to be so much more successful than trying to like have these big features you send out every 6 months. So that'd be my advice.
Nice. Ian, have any last bit of advice?
I mean, just do it. Like it can be scary putting your stuff out there. It can be scary trying something new, and the only way you can do it is to just do it. Borrowing from Nike here.
All right, unpopular opinion time.
I actually think you should probably leave.
All right. Ben, do you have an unpopular opinion?
I don't know how unpopular this is. I was trying to think of something related to our solo devs and open source stuff. I don't think that there's any way to directly monetize open source software. I was a big proponent of it, and I really wanted to make it work for years. And I don't think it's possible to do. So that'd be my unpopular opinion. I think that I think there's methods like open core. I think you're ultimately always going to sell something that's not your open source software. Like it might be private features on top of it. It might be support, but you're never going to sell the open source itself. Even like the GitHub sponsors, like I think it's a great idea and I wanted it to work, but I think there's just not very many people that are actually making like a living wage on GitHub sponsors. So my unpopular opinion is you can't do it.
I don't think I disagree. It's a tough truth to swallow in some way, because it's kind of like open source is clearly like the core of how we build software in the modern day. Like if you were to strip away all of the open source things, like not even the largest of tech companies would be able to function. It would just be far too expensive for them to operate. And yet it's just this kind of, it's the commons that everybody is getting. And yeah, it does feel like there's like, should be a way to monetize it. But yeah, I think I agree with you that there's just, it has to be something else that people get. And the reason why people, get into open source can't be money. Interested to see how that will do on Twitter and see how, or Twitter and Mastodon, Twitter and the Fediverse. I don't know, we're in such a strange world now.
I'm pretty sure we've had the exact opposite opinion before.
Oh, really?
I wouldn't be surprised if we had.
I think it was unpopular, so.
Okay.
I have a feeling people are going to agree with Ben.
Yeah. Okay. Ian, do you have an unpopular opinion?
I have one this week.
Okay, excellent.
I might get some hate for this one.
That's the point.
Safari is the best web browser.
Oh, God.
It is. It is.
I mean, I think it's great at downloading Chrome. I mean, I'll give you that.
I mean, as far as like web standards are concerned, it's objectively not the best. It's like very far behind the other two when it comes to implementing the web standards.
I agree with that too, but it is my favorite to use. It's the most ergonomic for me. It's the least memory hungry, the best battery life. All the things I care about, Safari has. All the things I don't really care about. It's not often I find a site that doesn't work in Safari, aside from this podcast recording website. But yeah, it's what I use day to day. It's my favorite. Is what it is.
Okay. I mean, I do kind of daily drive Safari, but I don't know if that's because it's the best or just because it exists in the Apple ecosystem. So everything is integrated very well with Safari. Everything just kind of works together in that nice little Apple magical way. Okay.
I think that one's going to be unpopular.
Yeah, I would agree with you.
Yeah. Maybe you said like Firefox is the best.
What about you, Chris?
I have so many unpopular opinions. Let me...
Real quick, I will say my son he's 12. He brought up Opera the other day. I was like, who uses Opera?
Oh my.
I was shocked. If he had said Opera's the best, that'd be really unpopular.
Opera's just Chrome now, though. So
is it? Okay.
Yeah. Opera did the thing Microsoft did with Edge before they did it with Edge, where they're just like, we're just gonna build this on top of Chromium. Yeah, we have a dearth of browser engines in the modern day. Unpopular opinion for me. I feel I gotta find a way to phrase this to be like maximally unpopular. I think that even people who call themselves the most pedantic when it comes to software engineers are not pedantic at all. I think that's my popular opinion.
I'm gonna need some more on that one.
I think people that are just like technically correct is the best correct people, right? People that live in that space and think of themselves as like I go by the definitions of everything are some of the worst people at actually defining things or following definitions as they were defined. Like I was talking with Ben in the pre-show about consistency and how lots of people love to talk about consistency. And yet that word means essentially nothing. Much like asynchronous. Sam Newman has a whole talk about how asynchronous is now a useless word because you have to put so many extra qualifiers around it that you might as well just toss out asynchronous and just say the qualifiers in the first place. And I feel like a lot of pedantic people in tech like using words like consistency and asynchronous and all of that. Same thing with like type safe or memory safe or all of those things. It's like, Rust is a safe language. It's like, okay, what do you mean by safe there? Huh? It's like, well, it's a memory safe language. Like, okay, but is it? Is it really? So yeah, I think even the people that are like super duper I'm a pedantic person. I care about all of the like nuances and things. I don't think they do. I think they're fooling themselves.
Do you have someone in mind you're thinking of?
I don't have anybody in particular I'm thinking of. I think it's just in general in our industry. Okay. I think people are just...
It's the vibe.
Yeah, it's the vibe. People should go read some more papers from like the 70s and actually find out what these words they're saying mean. Because that's another... I think it's an unpopular opinion I had in the past of just... We like to take words and make them mean the literal opposite of what they meant before. Like this happened with relational and object-oriented and... Well, a whole bunch of things, which is like that word, the person who defined that word meant not that at all. Like that's not, they meant the literal opposite of that thing. I think these are also words that the pedantic people use incorrectly. So they're bad at being pedantic. Maybe that's it. That's the concise way when I edit it. The pedantic people in software are bad at being pedantic.
I don't know. I have to think about that one. I'm not sure if I agree or disagree. I probably agree. Unless you're talking about me. In that case.
I don't know, Ben, would you describe yourself as pedantic?
Sometimes.
Okay.
So I guess that makes me bad at it. So there you go.
Yeah. Oh, okay. So if that one isn't unpopular enough, I do have another one. I think that certifications are a good thing and that software engineering needs many, many, many more certifications. Like exams you got to sit down and take, that you have to study for.
Then you could call yourself an engineer in certain states.
I mean, I'm not necessarily talking about like professional engineering, but I mean, we could work ourselves toward that. There technically was a PE exam for software engineering, but after a decade, they only had 81 people take it. So they're like, we're just not going to do this anymore.
I didn't know that. That's interesting. I would like to see that exam.
Yeah, I get the feeling that it had a lot of, because I tried to build like a software engineering body of knowledge and then use that to build the exam. And I kind of have the feeling that we're just not there yet as an industry. Like we focus too much on the new stuff and don't focus enough on the old established stuff, right? If you're like focusing on the old established stuff, people kind of look at you funny. If you're like, oh yes, I use XML because this is a well-established technology. We should write exams around certification about building APIs with XML. People would be like, or even trying to make a certification for like front end would be nearly impossible right now. Because it'd be like, well, what are you going to certify in React? Because then it'd be like certifying in Backbone and CoffeeScript a decade ago. So that's...
I think we just need less of a moving target in our industry before we can, make a standardized exam. But I mean, I'd be for it, honestly. I think that there's definitely some... Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's weird to think about other engineering industry, like professions and like, civil engineering. Like, I'm sure bridges have changed over the last 50, 100 years, but like, probably not over the last 5 that much. I'm not a civil engineer. I have no idea. But it's not like, you look at like the changes in our industry of like computers getting faster or, memory and disk sizes and stuff like that. And just the trade-offs change so quickly. Like it's hard. It's not like the XML was a bad choice before necessarily. It's maybe just different now or, different technologies come up. So yeah, I mean, it just feels like we need to like have some consistency in our industry before we can standardize, I guess.
Yeah, just more standardization. I do feel like the whole reason I have this idea is because I started randomly watching CCNA courses on YouTube, and I'm just like, oh, there's a lot of useful stuff here. And I'm like, I kind of wish we just had this for, a plethora of things in software engineering that weren't run by like companies. Like I think we do have certifications for like those company or technology specific things. Like I think there's some Kubernetes certifications you can get, or for like somebody's software. I'm sure like there's AWS has all of their certifications and all of that. But that is, I don't know if that's the useful kind of certification that I want.
I think I'm certified in SQL Server back in like 2001. So
yeah.
Let me know if you have any questions.
SQL Server is not a database that I tend to run. No, not that. Not Oracle. Not SQLite, though.
I had to use DB2 recently. That was rough.
Oh, I thought, can you run DB2 not on a mainframe? Is that just...
I don't know, actually. I think so.
Okay.
I'm not sure if the production server was on a mainframe or not, but I was shocked to see it.
DB2, that is...
My first ever database class ran Oracle and only Oracle.
I was an Oracle DBA for a long time too. for a couple of years.
There was no joins other than cross join, so I don't know what version that was, but
That's all you need.
Well, but yeah, that's my final unpopular opinion is we should have more certifications. Useful, caveat there, useful company agnostic certifications, or like, benevolent company. Like I feel like Cisco is one of those weird benevolent companies where it's just like, yeah, you have your certification, but it seems like you actually care about teaching people general networking stuff. But I also feel like the networking world is very different from our software world, or I don't even know what to call the world that we exist in as Go engineers at this higher level. High tech? Is that what the cool kids call it? Fang is high tech?
I don't know. I'm not cool, so
I'm not sure. Anyway, thank you, Ben, for joining us on this episode of Go Time.
yeah, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
And thank you, Ian, for co-hosting with me.
yeah, anytime.
And thank you, dear listeners, for taking the time to hear us through this fun podcast episode on developing Go software on your own.
All right, that is our show for this week. Thanks for listening. Did you happen to catch Kelsey Hightower on our new Friday talk show, Changelog and Friends? One of my favorite parts was when we were talking about the beauty of a 1.0 and the bloat that occurs when you just keep adding features to software.
You know what's funny? Like, imagine if music worked that way, right? Like, people have their favorite albums. You know all 12 of the songs on that album, and that's it. But imagine if that album kept adding songs. You're like, this don't sound like the same album anymore, right? Like, once you get past track 13 into track 72, it's a whole different vibe.
Find the full conversation in the Changelog feed or at changelog.com/friends/6. Thanks once again to our partners for helping us bring you Go Time each and every week. Shout out to Fastly.com, Fly.io, and Typesense.org. And thanks as always to our beat freak in residence, Breakmaster Cylinder. That's it. This one's done, but we'll talk to you again next time on Go Time.